Hi, so today is a beautiful Sunday here in Toronto, and I'm in the Woodbine Park. It's not because I'm not dressing a shirt that my knowledge about fintech is less valuable or less accurate. So for today, we are going to talk about the fintech ecosystem. So at the end of the day, what does it mean, the fintech ecosystem, and what kind of players we have in this space? Okay, so the fintech ecosystem is composed of multiple players and opportunities and also dangers. So the current environment in the fintech space is that first, you will locate most of the startups in actually financial hubs. The major reason for that is because a lot of the products and services for finance are located in those hubs. Examples such as New York, London, in the United Kingdom, Hong Kong, Singapore, and for the country where I'm living, Canada, is Toronto. Now, the thing about the fintech is that the opportunities, as I said, are located in the hubs, but the consumers are actually everywhere, right? So the point is that if you already work in fintech or finance, you only see the opportunities that you are used to, not the new opportunities that can actually challenge the market. So does it mean that being working in fintech in these hubs is necessarily bad? No, actually the money is there, and actually for a lot of fintech companies you require a lot of and huge amount of money. Now, in my first video I said that a lot of the fintech revolution is coming to the world as a B2C or business to consumer innovations, but now we are in the wave where business to business innovation from fintech is actually coming up, such as blockchain. And there are actually one big consortium that is trying to unlock the power of blockchain called R3, based in New York. And you have Ethereum and many other blockchains that kind of try to find its usefulness in the financial world. These are the example of B2C, B2B, but there are more others, like creating a marketplace for financial services for other banks or credit unions and things like that. And a lot of these products, they are pretty much invisible to the consumers. I don't want to waste your time to talk about like all these kind of stuff, because just for the sake of it. But what I want to show you is the complexity of this world. So a lot of the opportunities are actually, as I said, at this current stage in the B2B world, and there are multiple players in this industry, and I'm going to talk about a little bit more about. Imagine when we're studying an ecosystem, let's say a savanna, we usually know the predators, the prey, and things like that. In the fintech world, we can find something related to it, right? So we have a lot of startups that don't have a lot of resources, and they have to figure out ways to make money as quickly as possible before they run out of money. But on the other very end of the spectrum, we have players with a lot of money, such as banks themselves, the incumbents, as I said in the episode 1, but also some other kind of special investors, such as pension funds or asset management firms that have tons of money to play with, and even insurers, they are also in these categories. Look, at the end of the day, we have not many players, but we have a couple of categories. The startups, then we have the incumbents, then we have the regulators, and also we have the incubators, and we have also, well, the service providers. It doesn't matter if these companies are specifically located in insurance, alternative lending, they all fit in any one of these players. Watch, let's say, Discovery Channel. Usually we talk about the majestic predators or the poor little preys. But in this world, it's a little bit fuzzy, and we actually have to use other kind of analogies in order to understand what's going on. So, for instance, from the startup perspective and the venture capitalist, ideally you start small, grow very fast from revenue perspective, user perspective, and then you do an IPO, right? And launch your company into NASDAQ or Dow Jones or whatever these kind of marketplaces, and you hope to make a big bucks. But some companies like Lending Club and Stripe, they fit into this category. But for most of the startups in the fintech, they're actually struggling. So the investors don't want to lose money, but they are not in a big size or importance or strategic importance enough to either go for the IPO route or being purchased by a big bank or players like this. Now, when we think from another perspective, like the banks, they feel like they are huge blue whales, heavy, slow, although they can actually grab a lot of clients, but they are really afraid that they might lose market share, or maybe they might not be able to innovate as quickly as the startups. Now, should they be really afraid? It's pretty much an analogy to say, hey, should the lions be afraid of the gazelles or things like that? Not really. But the problem is that the lions might actually become extinct because the market where they are, let's say the environment they are, changes, and they just lose environment and space to live, and that actually can make them to become extinct. So an example, the equivalent from the digital world nowadays is actually everybody's trying to use apps, everybody using social media. So from that regards, the way that people are actually going to the bank and utilizing financial services are very different from the way that it used to be, by going to a branch and talking to someone, to the banker from the bank, and ask them to do something. Most of the people nowadays don't want to spend that time. They actually just want to do something very quickly on their app, compare prices or interest rate or their mortgages from an app, and try to do everything from an app. And if they want to understand something new or hear something new, they probably are looking from social media like Facebook, or when they are searching from Google. So from that perspective, yes, the environment is changing. So as an analogy, like the prey or the predator, right? Definitely the world is changing, and these animals or these players, they have to adapt. Now the regulators. So we spoke about the startup, the VCs, the banks. Now let's go for the regulators. They are kind of like there's no direct equivalent of regulators from the nature perspective, but they definitely are the overseers or the people who keep the rules of the games in place. Now, again, because the consumer world, how people interact with these financial services changed a lot, there are startups that are coming up with very innovative solutions that don't fit pretty exactly about how the way it used to be or what the big banks follow. So at the end of the day, what I mean is that you have, let's say, money transfers. You have a lot of these money transfers apps, and they don't exactly follow the rules that the big banks are following. And these rules exist because they're trying to prevent bad things to happen. So in this case, what should we do? That actually is the question that a lot of regulators and policy makers are actually asking themselves. We talk about the regulators, the policy makers, and things like that, but at the end of the day, there's a lot of other players, such as the vendors. The vendors are more like, I think the analogy would be those little birds that you probably see on Discovery Channel, and they stay on top of those bisons or those big animals, and they try to pack the vermin or things like that from those bigger animals, right? So they provide some service providers for big players and small players. Now they are actually important for the ecosystem, because without them, a lot of the services actually cannot exist. Honestly, a startup cannot actually build everything from scratch, so they rely on third parties to build a lot of their services and tools. And the same actually happens for big banks. So funnily enough, these service providers, they ended up providing innovations either to the startups or the big companies. Now why if that's the case, there should be no startup and all the innovation could be coming from the banks? but the banks actually are kind of slower in order to come up with new ideas, and they sometimes are afraid to do something bad to the consumers. We have other alternative players like private equity firms, asset management firms, and the list can go on. But and the insurers, they all have something in common. They have a lot of money and they can play with it. But the problem is that they are not technology savvy sometimes. They want to copycat, but they don't know how. So either they pay a lot to replicate something that is cheaper from people who knows about technology, or they just buy an existing company and try to retool it. They sound good on paper, but the reality is that to execute those things is still very hard. So at the end of the day, it's like even if you have a lot of money, it doesn't mean that you necessarily have success. This poses a question about how this ecosystem is going to evolve at the end of the day. It's funny, I'm here in the beach and I'm talking about fintech. Well, why not? Now, the last part, the final block, the information I want to say is that the future of fintech is actually a big question mark. And depending which player you are, you really need to understand where are you standing as a player in this ecosystem and try to minimize the weakness that you have and obviously play your strength. It sounds like a generic kind of recommendation, but that's actually what it is. But most of the time it's really hard for people to see what kind of strengths they have and what kind of weakness they have just because they're so used to everything, right? Well, it is not all lost. I think a more practical recommendation is that the more you read about the industry reports, and if you are really in the industry, you will actually see what's going to happen and what are the things that you should be doing if you are really in the fintech space. If you're planning to join the fintech space, then I think the recommendation is slightly different. It's to actually try to get in somehow. It's actually not as easy as you think to join in the fintech space because either you have to have a very strong technology background in order to support the financial guys, or you have to have or be a very strong financial person who understands the rules, regulations, and obviously the financial gains that you might have with that industry, and learn how to work with a technology partner in order to achieve certain goals. And finally, there should be a person who really understands marketing in order to come up with something that is useful for the people. Right? Just having technology and finance is not enough if you don't know how to communicate and make a brand that people can stick on it, right? So this concludes me about the ecosystem for this episode, and I'm going to enjoy the sun in this Sunday afternoon here in Toronto. Thanks for your time and hope I see you again later.